Well, Danny the Digger, welcome back to the Watchman Show, my friend.
Always a pleasure to be with you.
It just keeps getting better and better every time the Digger is with us here on the Watchman. And hey, today we are at one of the most significant archaeological sites in all of Israel. Danny, this is Beit She'an, a stunning view here from the mountaintop. Tell us where we are right now and why it's so important.
Well, we are on the top of the Acropolis, on top of the citadel of the city from Roman times, Romans and Byzantine times. But this was the city in the days of the Old Testament periods. And this is quite a significant place indeed. First of all, we're in the heart of the northern part of Israel at the eastern end of the Jezreel Valley. The Jordan Valley is behind us. This city sits on a major junction of trade routes. You've got abundance of water going down through the stream of Harod beneath you, springs erupting at the foothills of the Gilboa Mountains, land that could be cultivated here. In fact, I grew up in this area working in the cotton fields.
Yeah, you grew up in a kibbutz not far from here.
Just 7 kilometers away. My childhood was also operating the irrigation system of the cotton fields from the water.
Your old stomping grounds here.
Yes, also. Yeah. And the hill gives you protection. This place is ideal for human inhabitation in ancient times.
And the inhabitation goes back, what, 6,000 years, perhaps?
From Chalcolithic age, one of those prehistorical periods. But the main period of interest here from a biblical point of view is the last period of the Canaanites. Yeah. And the days of the Philistines fighting the Israelites.
Now, Danny, this is one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world, up there with Jericho, Damascus, and Jerusalem.
Jerusalem, yes. It's really an exception because it always gave those benefits of protection, of water, of land to cultivate, and the trade routes.
It's got it all, and the Egyptians saw that. For a time, the Egyptians controlled this area. Then the Canaanites.
Yeah.
And then the Philistines, the arch enemy of the Israelites.
Yes, this is a period, the 12th century is the time that the Canaanites are declining, and the New World Order is different other ethnic groups, the Gileadites, the Moabites, the Ammonites. And here we hear of the Philistines. The Philistines who really mastered the southern coastal plain, even have some influence over here, have some military presence, and Saul and the Israelites being formed on the mountains are confronting them.
This is very interesting, Danny, because the Philistines were in what today is called the Gaza area and Ashkelon, Ashdod, like you said, the coast. But they were growing so strong that they made their way here to Beit She'an, which is a ways from that area.
A pretty long distance. Yeah. It looks like they had an interest to try to connect to Mesopotamia, or at least to the trade routes to Damascus and Mesopotamia.
And we're not that far from Galilee, by the way, either.
It's just around the corner.
Yeah, it's a short drive to the Sea of Galilee.
Yes, and the Israelites are formed mostly in the mountains of Judea and Samaria, so they are afraid of them. And Saul is trying to confront them, but he knows that in the Jezreel Valley, the Philistines had an advantage of the chariots. So he tries to trap them up to the mountains. And Mount Gilboa, here behind us, will play a major role, the place of the battle.
We know it from the Bible very well.
He manages to trap them to go up the mountains, and still they are victorious.
The Philistines are victorious.
Let's read the text, okay? In the first book of Samuel, at the very end of it, it tells us the following. That the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. Then the Philistines followed hard after Saul and his sons, and the Philistines killed Jonathan, Avinadav, and Malchishua, Saul's sons. So Saul is trying to trap the Philistines into an area where they will lose their advantage of using their chariots. Up in the mountains, it's much harder to fight with a chariot. And although he manages to lead them into a battle on the Gilboa, he still loses.
And the Philistines, again, were the Israelites' arch enemy, Danny. I mean, this was a long-running feud between the Israelites and the Philistines, and you could see why Beit She'an was so strategic for the Philistines to hold and possess. This was an area where they could make further incursions into Israel and attack the Israelites from.
Definitely, definitely. And the loss, even on the mountains, was a big defeat, so much that Saul wanted to kill himself. He asked his armor bearer to kill him, He refused, so Saul falls on his sword. And the following day, the Philistines go through the bodies of the battle and they find the body of Saul and his sons.
So Saul's killed. His 3 sons are killed, including Jonathan, who was David's best friend.
Indeed. And they chop his head off and they hang his headless body on the walls of Beit She'an. Right here where we
Right here where we're standing. This is where King Saul was hung by his fierce enemy, hated enemy, the Philistines. His headless corpse. Right here.
But don't try to look for it, because the following sentence tells us of the friends of the Israelites, the Giladites, who come and take the body off and burn it and bury it in a proper way in the Gilad. So the remains of Saul are somewhere over there on the other side of the Jordan Valley.
Again, not far from where we're standing, Danny. And the Philistines, again, Saul ran himself through. The Bible says he ultimately killed himself. He was mortally wounded, but he couldn't stand the shame of being killed by the uncircumcised enemy, the Philistines. But I would think that the Philistines hung that headless body here of King Saul as a sign of intimidation, psychological warfare, I guess, against the Israelites.
Public humiliation. Here's what's left of your king. Indeed. Yeah. Now the question is, can archaeology actually track those walls? The body isn't here, but the walls, maybe archaeology could find evidence of that. And that's exactly what brought an American university here in the 1920s. They started peeling the top of the mountain here.
This is the University of Pennsylvania.
Of Pennsylvania. In the 1980s and 90s, a team from the Hebrew University worked here as well. They made very interesting discoveries. The walls themselves are still kind of hiding somewhere around here. We haven't found clear evidence of it, but maybe a third expedition will find those remains.
Yeah,
but this is the site.
So a tragic ending for King Saul. You know, Danny, his career began with such promise. He was anointed the first king of Israel. The Bible tells us he went down a wrong path, did King Saul, and it ended in disaster. But the Philistines held this area. Saul was disgraced, killed himself, hung. But King David avenged that. And tell us more about that. He came to Beit She'an later on.
He was, in a way, a political opposition to Saul.
Of course, Saul tried to kill him. Yes. Was insanely jealous of David.
But once Saul is dead, David makes a beautiful lamentation. We read some of this lamentation to this day in Israeli military cemeteries. The beauty of Israel is slain on your high places. How the mighty have fallen. Tell it not in Gath, proclaim it not in the streets of Ashkelon. Lest the daughters of the Philistines rejoice, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised triumph. And then he curses also the mountain for what it encountered. O mountains of Gilboa, let there be no dew, no rain upon you, nor fields of offerings. Look, the mountains of Gilboa are pretty barren.
It looks pretty barren today. Yes. So God heard King David's prayers, soon to be King David, we should say. He was not king at the time he wrote that, but when he did become king, Danny, he came back here to Beit She'an, took on the Philistines, and avenged King Saul and his best friend Jonathan's death. Tell us a little bit more about that.
He eventually created the united monarchy. He unites all of the tribes under his control. He creates Jerusalem now as the new capital of the united monarchy, the administrative and the religious center.
And Beit She'an was part of that kingdom, the United Kingdom of Israel.
Totally.
So David did get his revenge. The Philistines were defeated and eventually pushed out of here.
Yeah. And some 200 years later, the Assyrians completely wiped them out and the whole Philistine culture disappeared. Okay, no one
I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who curse you. No one cursed the Israelites more than the Philistines, and they're gone from the pages of history today. So Danny, from a biblical perspective, this site is obviously famous for the death of King Saul, his body hanged again from the walls of Beit She'an, but a really rich New Testament history here as well, and really I would say probably was thriving during that period more than any other time.
Totally. Just look beneath you here in the valley, what a big Roman Byzantine city has been exposed, and some of it is the city where Jesus walked.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that. This is fun because these are some of the most famous, I'd say, Roman ruins in the world. A stunning archaeological find here, an excavation, and we're going to be able to walk through them right now and talk a little New Testament. Danny, lead the way. Danny, I could not wait to do a show here at Beit She'an with you because, man, the stunning visuals. Look at these pillars. We are walking through the footsteps of history right now.
Indeed, and Beit She'an in classical periods is far more impressive than the remains of the Old Testament time.
It really is. Look at this. Wow, no wonder so many people come here, Danny, as tourists. It is just an amazing, amazing place. Okay, we know the Israelites controlled under King David, took it from the Philistines. Then the Assyrians came in here. Then what happened?
Well, the city after that apparently goes into decline. But then in the classical periods, in Hellenistic times, the veterans of Alexander the Great are probably the ones to re-inhabit the place. And now the city will be devoted to a very specific person, Dionysus.
The Greek god Dionysus.
Yes, the god of wine, of religious ecstasy. And you can tell that it's him because of the cluster of grapes decorating his head.
Okay, so the Greeks control it. But then it gets really interesting and really big when the Romans come in.
Indeed. And the pavement you're walking on is a result of the Roman takeover. In the 2nd century especially, the Romans will put a lot of money to beautify and enlarge the city. And the city will continue to thrive into Byzantine period, and evidence of that can be seen both on where we're walking, and a clear evidence of who paid for this was actually found on a mosaic floor that is part of the decoration of the pedestrian street. Yes. This was called the Stoa, the colonnaded street. Okay. Over there is where the chariots were. This was for the pedestrians.
So where we were just walking, that's where chariots would go down. But right here, this maybe had shops alongside here?
Here, right here.
You can see the remains right here, Danny, absolutely.
But here we have a unique piece of evidence of who paid, at least for the pavement of this street. It is Palladius Porphyrius, the Megalos Hegomenos, who paid for the creation of the Stoas, Kaipsephos, and the mosaic.
This is a very well-preserved mosaic, by the way. 2,000 years old.
Quite a few. We have, I don't know, over 50 ancient inscriptions, all of them in Greek, by the way, showing how pagan and Greek this city was.
So under Rome, this place was rocking. It was thriving. It was part of the Decapolis. Tell us what the Decapolis, I think I'm pronouncing it right. Tell it what it was.
Decapolis, 10 cities. It was a league of 10 cities that were pagan in nature and supported by the Romans. And it was already a treaty that was inactive in the days of Jesus. The New Testament mentions Jesus living in the Galilee, but operating also in the Decapolis. We know for sure that he at least twice walked in this area. Once when he is going through the Jordan Valley to the baptism site at the end of the Jordan River.
Sure.
And the second time when he goes up to Jerusalem. He walks through the Jordan Valley all the way down to Jericho, and from there he climbs up to Jerusalem.
Gotcha.
Okay, so he may have actually walked not on this pavement, but on the street that existed here in his time.
Danny, we mentioned that this city continued to thrive under the Romans. It continued to thrive under the Byzantine Empire. Even under Islamic rule, Beit She'an was a bustling city.
Yep.
What happened?
You see the rows of pillars over there falling in the same direction?
Sure.
January 749. On that day, probably in the morning hours, the earth shakes in a catastrophic way. We are on the seam of two tectonic plates, and that causes occasional earthquakes. But that specific earthquake was an unprecedented scale, and the whole city basically fell flat on its face.
Wow, you can see the pillars that are erect right now, by the way, they were restored.
Yes.
This was all leveled. All these pillars were on the ground when this site was uncovered.
Yes, but right behind you over here is one column of a giant monument, one out of 4 columns that decorated the entrance of some Roman monument. And it fell again in the same direction as all the others. It broke in two, and the capital of it is now on its head.
Wow.
Okay?
Danny, this was utter devastation. This once very important, very alive city was dead, flattened in one day.
Yes. The Ministry of Tourism of Israel markets the site as the Pompeii of the East. A big bustling city that is knocked down, not by the Vesuvius, but by an earthquake.
Wow, so it lied dormant for some time, I'm guessing.
And only in the 1980s, they started a big project of exposing all of this, and then the tourists started coming.
But maybe the crown jewel of Beit She'an is the ancient Roman theater here.
Yes, at the southern end of the city is a very well-preserved theater. It's now actually used also for public shows. Let's take a look at that.
Let's go, lead the way, my friend. Danny, I love this site. This is one of the most well-preserved Roman theaters that we have. It's kind of the crown jewel, I guess you would say, of Beit She'an. Tell us a little bit more about it.
Well, theaters were the way of entertaining the public in Roman times. Before TV, radio, and internet, what do you do in the evening?
This was it.
You go to watch a show. Either you watch a show in the theater or you go to have a nice bath in the public bathhouses. Or in the back here, we had a hippodrome. We found a full-scale hippodrome, a place for horse races, which was converted later into an amphitheater, a place for gladiator shows. This is what you do in Roman times in Beit She'an.
Yeah, it's interesting because we talked about the devastation, Danny, and that horrific earthquake that flattened this place, but you can really get a picture here of how this was once a thriving and bustling city. Hey, this stadium was packed. People were here being entertained every night at Beit She'an.
Yeah, the best shows were for the distinguished members, the rulers of the city in the front seat. Okay, and this was the place to get entertained at night.
And one of the most well-preserved, I would think, that we have of Roman theaters in terms of the remains?
In Israel, definitely. This one combined with the one in Caesarea. The best examples for a Roman city in the Holy Land.
Yeah, like you said, this was the main city of that Roman Decapolis, that grouping of 10 cities here in Israel during Roman times. Now, you mentioned an amphitheater, Danny, just close by. That's an important place, right?
Yes, especially from a point of view of Christian history, because in the late Roman period, these institutions were places where Christians were executed in a public way. The Romans were intimidated by the growing popularity of this religion, and Christians who would not follow the worship of the emperor would be put to death by beasts in those places.
And it's just close by.
There's a very well-preserved example found here in Beit She'an as well. Let me show you this.
Let's go, lead the way. Danny, as you were telling us, this was a very important place at the time when Beit She'an was a thriving Roman city, but a pretty sinister background to where we're standing right now. Tell us about it.
This is an amphitheater, a theater attached to another one, which is for a sole purpose, to put people to death in a very creative way. Okay, Romans were experts on cruelty, and this was one of the ways to execute people in a public way. You throw them into this arena. Arena, by the way, literally means in Latin sand. All of this was filled up with sand, so when the people are dying in the battle, the sand will absorb the blood.
Wow. Out of these doors, Danny, like the movie Gladiator, you and I were talking about it off camera, out of these doors came gladiators, lions, and unfortunately, right in the middle where we're standing right now, there were probably Christians who met a very grisly end.
Yes, people fighting.
Because of their faith.
And the end was known. They were doomed to die one way or another. And all of this in a sick way, also to entertain the public. The Romans thought this is some sort of a weird entertainment. And it's hard to imagine what went on here some 1,400 years.
Yeah. So Beit She'an, Danny, what are your thoughts overall? What a day we've had, by the way. A very important site. And this site, by the way, this amphitheater, not too many people come here. You took us to kind of a special hidden little gem here, I guess you would say.
Yes, most people go to the main attractions of the downtown.
Sure, where we just were, the theater, of course.
Yeah, but there's also a very significant amphitheater, which was originally, by the way, a hippodrome for horse races, but the public wanted blood. You know, just like in today, we have, dramas and comedies.
Yeah, this is the ultimate reality TV.
Exactly, kind of predicting what Hunger Games are trying to suggest. One day we'll see live shows of people fighting one another.
To the death.
And this is what happened here in Roman times. People wanted entertainment in the most cruel way. The Romans actually encouraged this. And if there's one thing that Christianity managed to change here in Beit She'an is shut down the amphitheaters.
Very interesting. Well, Danny, thank you so much, my friend, as always, for joining us in our travels throughout the land of Israel. Beit She'an, we've been waiting to do this one for a while. It was awesome.
It was my pleasure, as always.
As always, my friend.